The market square at Harrowden held its cold that morning, the way it held everything else, without mercy and without apology. And Prudence Vane stood at the edge of the cheese stall with her basket over one arm and her spine very straight, while three young women in fresh muslin decided aloud that she was not worth lowering their voices for. She was 29. She had heard the arithmetic of her own life performed in public before, and she had learned to let it pass over her the way rain passed over stone, changing nothing, wearing only slowly. The eldest of the three, a Miss Colby with a bonnet trimmed in cherry ribbon, glanced at her, and then away and said, the word without effort, Spinster. It was not shouted. That was the cruelty of it. It was said in the same tone one might use to name the weather. Prudence counted out her coins for the cheese and did not look up. Her gloves had been mended at the thumb, and she had mended them herself. And the stitches were neat because she did everything neatly, because neatness was the one dignity poverty could not take from a woman if she refused to surrender it. Behind her, the three young women laughed at some private thing, and she told herself the laugh was not about her. And she did not quite believe it. You have perhaps stood where she stood. You have perhaps felt a room decide something about you before you were permitted to speak. If you have, stay with her a while, because this is a story about the moment such a verdict is overturned, and the man who overturned it did not yet know he would. What the square did not know, what Miss Colby with her cherry ribbon could not have guessed, was that Prudence Vane had once been meant for a different life entirely. Her father had been a physician of some standing, and there had been a house with a garden and a pianoforte, and a future that everyone assumed. Then there had been a fever season, and her father had gone out into it night after night to sit with the dying, and one December he had not come home well, and by February he was in the ground. The house went to his debts. The pianoforte went to a family across the county. Prudence went to a set of rented rooms above a chandler's shop with her aunt, who was kind in the way of tired people, which is to say, occasionally and without warning. She had learned to keep accounts. It had not been a thing she chose, so much as a thing that remained to her when the other things were gone. Her father had liked to say that figures did not lie and did not flatter and did not care who held the pen, and that a mind trained to them held a small, clean room no misfortune could enter, and she had thought it only a fond saying at the time, and had come since to know it for the truth it was. She kept the books for the chandler below her rooms, and for the milliner 2 doors down, whose stock ran always ahead of her sums, and for the widowed schoolmaster, Farley, whose figures wandered like his mind, and whose columns she gently set right without ever once letting him feel corrected. The coins these labors brought her were small. They were counted out to her most weeks in the very shops where she was named a spinster in the next breath, by people who paid her, because she was exact, and pitied her because she was unwed, and did not appear to feel the contradiction. They were hers, and she was proud of them, in a way she would never have said aloud, because a woman who works is a woman the square can name and price and set upon a shelf, and Prudence had learned that the surest way to keep a small dignity was to want nothing the square could withhold. Spinster was only the politest of the names available. She had heard the others. She kept her own accounts of those too. In the clean room no misfortune could enter, and she did not let them show on her face. The bell of St. Aldhelm's rang the half-hour, and Prudence gathered her basket and turned toward the lane that led home. And it was then that the carriage came into the square. It was a fine carriage, dark and well kept, drawn by a matched pair, and the whole market seemed to shift its weight toward it the way a field of barley leans into wind. Prudence knew whose it was, because everyone knew. The estate of Ashcombe sat 2 miles beyond the town, and its master had come into the title 18 months before, on the death of his elder brother, and in 18 months he had appeared in Harrowden precisely 4 times, and each time the square had held its breath, and each time he had transacted his business and gone. Julian Ashcombe, the Earl of Ashcombe, was said to be cold. He was said to be proud. He was said to have refused every invitation extended to him since his mourning ended, which the mothers of the county found unforgivable, and the daughters of the county found intriguing, and Prudence found neither, because a man like that had nothing to do with a woman like her, and she had stopped, long ago, expecting men to have anything to do with her at all. She meant to be gone before he stepped down. She did not manage it. The Earl descended from the carriage with the particular economy of a man who wasted no motion, and he was tall, and his coat was very dark, and his face was still in the way that winter water is still, holding its depth beneath a surface that gave nothing back. He was perhaps 35. There was a gravity to him that made the square's usual chatter falter, and into that faltering came a small disaster, entirely ordinary, entirely human. A boy of perhaps 7, ragged at the cuffs, darted between the stalls chasing a hoop, and the hoop went wide, and the boy went after it directly into the path of the matched pair as the coachman was still settling them. Prudence did not decide to move. Her body decided for her. She dropped the basket, and the cheese rolled, and she was across the cobbles with her hand fisted in the back of the boy's collar before she had formed a thought, hauling him back against her skirts as the near horse tossed its head and stamped a hoof down where the child had been. The boy shrieked. The horse settled, and Prudence stood in the middle of the square with her heart going like a hammer and a filthy weeping child pressed to her waist, and she became aware slowly that the entire market was looking at her, including the Earl of Ashcombe. He had gone very still, stiller even than his usual stillness, and he was looking at her with an intensity that had no name she was willing to give it. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the boy's mother came screaming through the crowd and took the child from her, sobbing, "Thanks." And the ordinary noise of the square rushed back in, and Prudence knelt and gathered her spilled cheese and her bruised basket, and told herself the whole thing was already over. She did not see the Earl watching her. Still, you did. He did not speak to her that day. He did what he had come to do, some business with the corn factor, and he returned to his carriage, and only once, at the last, did he look back toward the lane where she had gone. The look was brief. His steward, a spare man named Harding, noticed it and said nothing, because Harding had served the family long enough to know when a silence was to be kept. It was 3 days later that the Earl of Ashcombe came to the chandler's shop. "I'd best." Prudence was at the counter with the account book open before her, her pen moving down a column of figures, when the bell above the door announced someone, and she said without looking up that she would be with them directly. Then the quality of the silence changed, and she raised her eyes, and the Earl was standing just inside the door with the gray afternoon behind him, filling the small shop the way a large object fills a small room, by making everything else seem to have been arranged around him. She rose too quickly, and the stool scraped. "My lord," she said, and did not know what to do with her hands. He looked at the account book, and then at her. And his voice when it came was low and level, a voice built for rooms much larger than this one. "You keep the accounts here," he said. It was not a question, but she answered it as one. "I do," she said, "and for the milliner, and for Mr. Farley the schoolmaster. My father taught me figures before he died." Something moved behind the Earl's face at the word died, some small settling, and it was gone before she could read it. He set a folded paper on the counter. "Ashcombe requires a person to put its household books in order," he said. "They have not been properly kept since my brother's illness. Harding manages the estate. He does not pretend to manage arithmetic. I am told you are exact." Prudence looked at the folded paper as though it might bite. The offer was impossible. A woman did not go alone to the great house of a single gentleman to keep his books. The square would say the word again, and this time it would attach a worse word to it. She thought of her aunt, and of the coins that were never quite enough, and of the winter coming, and she thought of all of this in the space of one breath. And the Earl watched her think it with those still eyes that missed nothing. "It would not be proper, my lord," she said quietly, "for me to come alone." "You will not come alone," he said. "My aunt keeps the house. There is a governess for my ward. You will be one woman more, in a house full of women, and you will be paid 4 times what the milliner pays you, and you will dine in the housekeeper's room and go home each evening in the estate cart." He paused. "I do not make offers twice, Miss Vane." He knew her name. She had not given it to him. She turned that fact over and set it aside for later, and she looked at the winter coming, and she said yes. The word ward stayed with her on the walk home. She had not known the Earl of Ashcombe had a ward, the square for all its knowing. Had not known either, or had not troubled to say. Ashcombe was smaller inside than its grey face promised, and warmer and older. Prudence came to it that first morning through a side door, with her mended gloves and her own steel pen, and she was met not by the Earl, but by his aunt, Lady Sefton, a small, upright woman of perhaps 60, with a face like a closed fan, who looked Prudence over once, thoroughly, and pronounced her clean and quiet, which from Lady Sefton was evidently high praise. The books were in the estate office, a low-paneled room, at the cold end of the house that smelled of ink and beeswax and old paper, with a single tall window that gave onto the kitchen garden and a fire that Harding had lit for her without being asked, which was the first small kindness Ashcombe had shown her and which she did not forget. The books were a wreckage. Prudence sat down at the wide desk and opened the topmost ledger, and understood within an hour exactly what had happened to them. A house whose master has died slowly leaves a paper trail of that dying, and the previous Earl's long illness was written all through these pages, the way a slow frost is written across a window, in the widening gaps between entries, in the sums begun in a firm hand and finished, weeks later in a hand that wavered, in the whole columns that no longer sat true, because the man who kept them had grown at last too weak to carry the ones from line to line. She found the last entry he had made himself. It was for a quantity of coal laid in against a winter he did not live to feel. And the final figure trailed off the edge of the number into nothing, as though the pen had simply been set down and not taken up again. And she sat with that for a moment. She did not find the work dreary, as another might have. She found it, in a strange way she could not have explained to anyone in the county, like tending someone, like closing the eyes of a thing that had died with its eyes open. She trimmed a fresh point onto her steel pen. She set to work, and she worked the way she did everything neatly. And the neatness was, here as everywhere, a kind of respect. It was the child who found her first. Prudence had been at Ashcombe perhaps a week, when the office door opened without a knock, and a small girl stood in it, dark-haired and solemn, perhaps 6 years old, holding a wooden horse missing one leg. The girl regarded Prudence with the frank assessment children give, and adults have trained out of themselves. "Are you the cross lady?" the child asked, "or the counting lady?" "I am the counting lady," said Prudence gravely. "I do not think I am cross." "Are you the young lady of the house?" "I am Clara," said the girl, as though that settled everything, and came in and put the three-legged horse on the desk among the ledgers, and explained that its leg had broken, and that no one at Ashcombe could mend it, because the men were all busy and Lady Sefton said it could not be helped. Prudence looked at the horse. Then she opened her workbox, and took out the small awl and the thread she carried for her own mending, and she fitted the broken leg back to its body with a wooden pin, whittled from the shaft of a spent quill and a binding of waxed thread. And she gave it back mended, and Clara looked at it and then at Prudence, with an expression that no one had turned on Prudence in a very long time. "You mended it," Clara said wonderingly, as if this were a thing the world did not generally do, as if broken things in her experience stayed broken, or went away, and did not come back mended and warm in the hand. She turned the horse over and found the new leg firm under her small thumb, and she pressed it, testing the way a child tests whether a promise will hold, and it held. "I did," said Prudence. "There, he may run again." She said it lightly, and she did not look too long at the child's face, because there was something in it she recognized, a carefulness, a habit of not expecting, that she had seen every morning of 7 years in her own glass, and she did not wish the child to see her see it. What the counting lady did not know was that the Earl of Ashcombe had come to the office door a moment before, meaning to ask about the tenant rolls, and had stopped in the passage when he heard the child's voice, and had stood there unseen through the whole of the mending. He did not come in. He went away again very quietly, and that evening at dinner he did not eat. And Lady Sefton, who missed nothing that her closed fan of a face pretended not to see, watched him not eating, and drew her own conclusions and kept them, as everyone at Ashcombe kept things. Clara Prudence learned was the daughter of the late Earl. She was the reason Julian Ashcombe had a ward, and she was, Prudence came slowly to understand, the reason for a great deal else besides. The child had been in the house through her father's whole long dying. She had a way of going very still when a door closed too hard. She did not like the sound of coughing. And her uncle, the new Earl, who was set across the county to be cold, came to the nursery every single evening without exception, and sat with her while she took her supper, and said almost nothing, and left again. And Prudence, who saw this because her work sometimes kept her late, revised her opinion of the word cold, and did not tell anyone she had revised it. The Earl fell into a habit of coming to the estate office in the late afternoons. He told himself, and told Harding, that he came to review the progress of the accounts. And this was true, and it was not the whole of the truth. And both men knew it, and neither said it. He would come in without ceremony, and stand at the tall window with his hands clasped behind his back, and his eyes on the kitchen garden. He would ask her a question about a tenant or a sum, and she would answer it exactly. And then a silence would come, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which surprised them both a good deal. Once he asked her how she had learned to read a hand as bad as his late brother's, and she told him that a physician's daughter learns early to decipher bad hands, because there is no worse hand in England than a doctor's, and that she had copied her father's case notes fair for him from the age of 12. The Earl was quiet a moment, and then he said that she must have been a great help to her father, and Prudence bent over the ledger, felt the sentence land somewhere it had no business reaching, because no one had said such a thing to her since her father died, and she kept her eyes on the column and said only that she had tried to be. He was a man who had been alone inside a crowd for a long time. She was a woman the crowd had decided not to see. In the quiet office with the ledgers between them they were, for an hour at a time, simply two people, and neither of them had had that, in longer than they would have admitted to a living soul. She grew, without meaning to know the sound of his step in the passage, the particular unhurried weight of it, and her hand would steady on the pen a half-beat before the door opened, and she told herself this meant nothing, and her hand went on knowing him before the door did. "Come away from the ink before the light goes," he said to her one evening, in the tone she had already learned to read, the tone that was shaped like a command, and meant something else entirely underneath. "You will ruin your eyes." She set down her pen and looked up, and the last of the gray afternoon was going blue in the window behind him, and he was watching her with that still face that gave nothing back, and somehow, lately, gave a great deal. She did not tell him that no one had troubled about her eyes in 7 years. She thought, from the way he held her gaze 1 moment past the moment he needed to, that he might have known it anyway. It was Lady Sefton who first spoke the difficulty aloud, and she spoke it to Prudence directly, in the small sitting room over tea, in the manner of a woman who preferred surgery to festering. "You are sensible," she said, "so I will be plain. My nephew watches you. I do not think he knows that he does it. This county, however, has a long memory and a short charity, and you are a physician's dispossessed daughter keeping accounts. And there is a name they will fasten to any woman who spends her afternoons in a gentleman's house, and it is not the name Spinster. Do you take my meaning?" Prudence took it entirely. She had taken it before she ever walked through the side door. "I take my wages, and I go home in the cart each night," she said. "There is nothing to fasten a name to." "There is what a thing is," said Lady Sefton, "and there is what a rune decides it is, and the second has ruined more women than the first." She set down her cup. "I do not say this to send you off. I say it because I have watched my nephew grieve for 2 years and eat like a man doing penance, and this last fortnight he has eaten his dinner." She looked at Prudence with her closed fan of a face opened, just slightly, just once. "Be careful, that is all. Be careful for both of you." Prudence walked home in the cart that evening with the words, "Be careful," for both of you sitting in her chest like a swallowed coal. She told herself Lady Sefton was mistaken. She told herself a man of 35 and the rank of Earl did not watch a woman of 29 who mended toys and kept sums, and she almost persuaded herself. And then she remembered the way he had said, "You will ruin your eyes." And she stopped persuading herself, and she lay awake. The trouble when it came dressed as concern, which is the costume trouble prefers in the country. There was a cousin of the late Earl, a Mr. B. Gregory Ashcombe, who stood next in the succession, should Julian die without a son, and who had reasons of his own to wish the present arrangement of the house disturbed. He had heard, as everyone hears everything, in a county, that a young woman kept the Ashcombe books and dined in a house and had grown thick with the child. He came down from town wearing an expression of family feeling, and he sat in the good drawing-room and drank the good wine, and he began gently to work. It was Gregory who voiced the word the second time, and he voiced it better than Miss Colby had because he understood how to make a word carry poison while remaining, on its surface, only truthful. He said it to the Earl himself, over the port, with Harding standing silent at the sideboard and hearing every syllable. "A spinster of no fortune and questionable position," Gregory said, "with the run of your house and the ear of your ward. People are beginning to talk, cousin. I say it only from affection. A man in your position cannot afford a woman in hers." The Earl said nothing for a long moment. He turned his glass a slow half-circle on the dark wood and watched the candlelight move in the wine, and Harding at the sideboard held his breath, for Harding had served 3 Earls of Ashcombe and knew that this silence was the most dangerous sound the present one made. Then the Earl said only that his affairs were his own, in a voice level as a laid floor, and Gregory smiled and inclined his head and let it lie, because Gregory had not come to win the thing in one evening over the port. He had come to plant a thing and go away again and let the county do the slow, patient work of watering it. The county, given such a seed, is nothing, if not diligent. It has little else to do through a long autumn, but tend the growing of its own opinions, and it tends them well, and it does not much care what withers in their shade. Prudence felt the change before she understood it, the way one feels weather turn before the first cloud crosses the sun. The estate cart came for her one morning, and the driver, a steady young man who had always tipped his hat and asked after her aunt, would not meet her eye, and kept his gaze on the horse's ears, the whole 2 miles, and she rode in behind his silence and understood that whatever was being said, in the town, it was worse and plainer. Miss Colby and her friends turned their ribbons away when she passed, not in the easy mockery of that first market morning, but in something colder and more deliberate, the particular cut a small society gives, a woman it has decided to expel, the cut that pretends the cut woman is not there at all. The milliner, who had paid Prudence for 3 years to keep her sums, found reasons the accounts might be kept by someone else now. Her aunt heard things at the chandler's counter, half sentences that stopped when she came near, and repeated them at home, white-lipped and frightened, because her aunt had lived long enough in the world to know that a young woman's name, once bruised, does not heal. In a country town, it only darkens. A letter came for Prudence at Ashcombe one afternoon, brought in on the salver with the estate post, unsigned, the hand disguised. She read the first 2 lines of it standing at the office desk, and then she did not read the rest. She burned it in the office grate, and watched the paper curl and take and blacken, and told herself it was nothing, only the county doing what the county did, and her hands shook while it burned, and she despised them for shaking. She understood that she had become a story. She had spent her whole life being not worth the square's attention, and now, without having done a single thing differently, she was worth a great deal of it, and the attention was worse than the neglect had ever been. She thought about leaving. She thought about it seriously, standing at the office window where the Earl liked to stand, looking out at the gray grounds. She had wages saved. She could go to her mother's cousin in Bath and keep some other family's books. Be once more a woman no one troubled to name. It was Clara who undid the plan, without knowing there was a plan to undo. The child came into the office and climbed onto the stool beside Prudence and asked, in her frank way, whether it was true that the counting lady was going to go away like her father went away. And Prudence, who did not lie to children, could not say no and could not say yes, and sat with the question, and Clara took her silence for the answer it half was, and put her small face down against Prudence's sleeve, and did not cry, which was worse than crying, because she had clearly learned somewhere that crying did not bring people back. Prudence did not leave. The leaving had been a door. And now the door was shut, and on the other side of it the county went on watering Gregory's seed, and the thing grew. It came to its head at the Ashcombe harvest gathering, which Lady Sefton held every year for the tenants and the neighboring families, and which the present Earl had let her hold this year against his own inclination, because his aunt had told him the house could not go on refusing the world forever. It was held in the long gallery and spilled out through the terrace doors into the blue autumn dusk, and there was a small hired orchestra at the far end, and there were candles enough along the walls and in the chandeliers to make the grey house glow gold from within, so that from the dark grounds it must have looked like a lantern set down in a field. Prudence was there because Lady Sefton had asked her to keep the accounts of the evening, the wine drawn up from the cellar and the plate hired from the town and the fee for the musicians, and had then told her in the flat way that permitted no argument, that she would wear her good gown and stay for the dancing, like a Christian, and not creep off to the housekeeper's room like a mouse. So Prudence had done it. She stood at the edge of the long gallery in her one good gown of soft green, the gown she had made over twice and trimmed fresh for this, and she watched a world she had once in another life been meant to belong to, moving and turning and laughing under the golden light. She had thought it would hurt to watch it. She found that it did not hurt, as she had feared, because somewhere in the last weeks, without permission and without wisdom, she had stopped standing outside the warmth looking in, and had begun, foolishly, to feel that she stood a little way inside it. That was the danger. She knew it. Even then, a woman is safest at the window. It is only when she steps into the room that the room can turn on her. Gregory Ashcombe chose that room, and that crowd, to spend his seed at last. He did it beautifully. He raised a glass and he spoke of family, and of the sad decline of the late Earl, and of how touching it was to see the household find new interests. And then he looked directly at Prudence across the bright gallery, and he said the word for the third time. And this time, he rapped it in the whole crowd's hearing. "It is a Christian thing," he said, "for a great house to give charity to an aging spinster fallen on hard times. One only hopes the charity is not repaid with presumption. One hopes she knows her place." The gallery went quiet, the way a struck bell goes quiet before the sound arrives. Every face turned. Miss Colby was there among the neighboring families, and her cherry ribbon was gone to some autumn color now, and her mouth had fallen into a small, satisfied line. Lady Sefton's fan had stopped. And Prudence stood in her soft green gown in the center of 200 candles with the word "aging spinster" hanging in the gold air, and she felt the old rain begin to fall over the old stone. And she made herself very straight, and she prepared as she had prepared her whole life, to let it pass over her. It did not pass over her this time. This time, it landed, because this time she had let herself want something, and a woman who has let herself want something can be hurt where a woman who has surrendered, wanting, cannot. And Prudence discovered in that bright, terrible moment exactly how much she had let herself want, and how foolish it had been, and she felt her eyes begin to sting. She would rather have died than let the gallery see it fall. She turned to go. That was all she meant to do. Turn and walk the length of the gallery under all those eyes, and go out into the dark in the cart, and never come back, and let the county have its story finished, the way it liked its stories finished, with the woman gone, and her place kept. She had taken 2 steps when the Earl of Ashcombe crossed the room. He did not hurry. That was the thing the gallery would speak of afterward, in the days and weeks that followed, in tones growing warmer as the telling wore the cruelty out of it. He did not hurry, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not so much as glance at his cousin Gregory. He crossed the whole bright length of the gallery through the parting crowd with his still winter face, and he came to Prudence where she had stopped, frozen, one step into her leaving, and in front of the neighboring families and the tenants and his aunt and his ward and the whole assembled county that had spent a fortnight deciding what she was. The Earl of Ashcombe went down on one knee before her on the gallery floor. The gallery made a sound. Not a word, a sound. The sound a room makes when it must rearrange everything it believed in a single instant. He took her mended glove in his hand. He looked up at her, and his still face was not still at all. Now it had opened the way the winter river opens when the ice at last gives, and he said, the only thing he said, and he said it, so that every soul in the room heard it, and no soul in the room could ever after pretend they had not. Miss Vane, do me the honor. Be my wife. 7 words. That was all. He did not defend her with a speech. He did not turn and shame his cousin, though his cousin stood shamed, regardless, because a truth told plainly shames a lie, without needing to touch it. He knelt on his own gallery floor before a physician's dispossessed daughter in a mended glove, and he asked her to be the Countess of Ashcombe in front of the very people who had that evening named her a charity case, and by kneeling he unsaid every unkind word the county had spent on her. Because a room will believe a man's knees where it will not believe his words, and the Earl of Ashcombe had gone down on his. Prudence could not speak. Her whole life had trained her to expect nothing, and expecting nothing is a strong wall, and the wall had just come down, and there was nothing behind it but a woman of 29 who had wanted all along only to be seen. She looked down at him kneeling, and she saw that he was not doing this to defeat Gregory, or to scandalize the room, or to make a point to the county. She saw that he was doing it because he could not any longer bear not to, and that the cost to him, a proud, grieving man kneeling in public, was enormous, and that he was paying it gladly for her. Yes, she said. It came out as barely a sound. Then she said it again, so the room could have it too. Yes. He rose, and he did not embrace her, because he was still the Earl of Ashcombe, and this was still his gallery, but he kept her gloved hand in his, and he turned with her to face the room, and the room which a moment before had been ready to watch a woman driven out of it, found that it had instead witnessed a countess maid, and the county, which loves a wedding far more than it loves a grievance, began, in ones and twos and then in a warm rush, to applaud. Gregory Ashcombe set down his glass and left the gallery, and no one marked his going, which was its own complete punishment for a man who had staked everything on being watched. Lady Sefton did not applaud. Lady Sefton stood at the side of the gallery, with her closed fan of a face wide open at last, and there were tears standing in her old eyes, and she looked at her nephew, eating at last at the world instead of doing penance against it, and she thought, in the single short clause she permitted herself, that her brother would have been glad. Then she snapped her fan shut, and went to see about the wine, because someone had to, and grief and joy are both, in the end, best carried by keeping busy. They were married at St. Aldhelm's before the winter closed the roads, quietly, which was what they both preferred with Clara, scattering the last dry rose petals of the year down the aisle and taking the duty with enormous seriousness. The county came. Of course, the county always comes. Miss Colby came and wished the new countess very happy, and the new countess wished her the same, and meant it more or less because a woman who has been at last chosen can afford a great deal of charity toward the women who once decided she never would be. It is a small thing to tell you, and I will tell it, and then let them be. On the first evening of the new year, in the family sitting room at Ashcombe, with snow coming down soft and steady, past the tall windows and the fire making the leather book spines glow, Prudence sat with her workbox open, on her knee. Clara was asleep against her side, worn out with the newness of everything, and the Earl of Ashcombe, her husband, came and sat beside her, and watched her hands, and asked what she was mending now. She held it up for him to see. It was the wooden horse, the 3-legged horse she had mended once already, and Clara had loved it so hard the pin had worked loose again, and Prudence was setting a new one, a proper one this time, turned from good ash. That would hold. The Earl looked at the little horse in his wife's careful hands, the toy she had mended on the first day he ever watched her without her knowing, the day the whole thing had, though neither had said so, begun. He did not speak. He put his hand over her 2 hands, and the horse between them, and the snow came down and the fire held, and in the whole warm room there was nothing left that needed mending at all. If Prudence and Julian's evening stayed with you, stay a moment longer, and tell me, quietly, which mended thing in your own life you are glad you did not throw away. I will be listening. Thank you for staying to the end.